So according to David Bowie, this band is more influential than the Beatles. Look, when it comes to both names, the Beatles and David Bowie are titans of influence in the music industry. But David Bowie in particular was responsible for thinkers, actors, writers, and all sorts of performers attributing his name to their success. He's a man whose musical career was an odyssey brimming with colourful characters with ample twists and turns at each year, making his career stuff of legend. His music drew on the avant-garde, the jazz, the glam, and the deeply experimental, and without his unwavering commitment to sonically innovate year on year, we wouldn't have the left field icons that we have today, like PJ Harvey, Bjork, or Aphex Twin, to name but a few. And alongside his music, apart from a brief cocaine-fueled foray into controversial behaviour in the 1970s, his wisdom offstage and outside of the studio has also been a massive source of inspiration for artists and creatives and thinkers all across the world. And if you had to pinpoint a time when this started, it would be the 1980s, when he experienced a level of fame that he hadn't yet seen before. His 1983 hit Let's Dance bridged the gap from pop star to cultural icon in general, so it meant the whole world was more interested in what he had to say. And so he was frequently asked to give his thoughts and opinions on geopolitics, society, and culture at large. And if you go through the internet, it's teeming with examples of Bowie hot takes. So when Bowie found himself discussing the biggest band in the world, the Beatles, he used it as a chance to question the legitimacy of their influence on music. Bowie said bands like the Beatles, who are so extremely large in terms of what they sold and the influence they had, clearly had an impact back then, but actually that very little of their influence is actually felt now. And then Bowie went on to name one band who he thinks inspired actual artistic change. He said it was the fringe, strange bands that nobody ever bought, like the Velvet Underground, that actually have created modern music. And you kind of think, where's Yesterday in all of this? Where's its influence on modern music? Bowie then went on to list 2 songs to prove his point in detail. He said that the Velvet Underground's I'm Waiting for the Man had more influence than the Beatles' Penny Lane on shaping the sounds of modern bands. And in particular, he referenced Oasis and Blur, who were the 2 biggest bands in 1996. Bowie said, well, there's a couple of British bands that use trumpets every now and again and say that they're Beatles influenced, but in reality what they generally gravitate more to is Waiting for the Man than Penny Lane. And so to prove his point even further, Bowie then went on to pit artists against critics. He said while it was critics who generally respond to trends and then as such label the Beatles as the most influential band of all time, it's the artists who shape those trends, like the Velvet Underground and the fringe bands who existed around them. He said, tomorrow's culture is always dictated by the artists. So however many critics were saying how important the Beatles were, there were artists running around saying, yeah, they're okay, but have you heard the Velvet Underground? The artists make culture, not the critic. I guess it's difficult for some Beatles fans to hear Bowie referencing the Beatles as a mainstream artist, but no matter how groundbreaking and innovative they were definitely mainstream given how widespread their popularity was. But more importantly, I guess Bowie's opinion triggers a question about how influence works in culture as a whole. Is it in the mainstream or is it in the cultural fringes?